I'm very happy that you're here. Simon is a professor and director of the Connected Intelligence Center at the University of Technology, Sydney. The only thing I would like to highlight, and then I hand over to you, is like, I think Simon did great work in many fields related to learning. It's like highlighting here social analytics, discourse analytics, dispositional analytics, and writing analytics, and inspired a lot of people in the domain. So, Simon, I stop my sharing, and the floor is yours in a minute.
Thank you, Marcus. It's great to be with you. I wish, looking at the program there and the slides, it looks like an awesome day that you guys are going to have, and it'll be fantastic if I could be with you right now. Let's hope we can move quickly from holograms to teleportation in the near future. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen okay now. I've got the chat open as well. If people post comments there, I'll pick them up either en route or at the end. So thank you for inviting me to open your day. I'm going to give you an overview of a book chapter that I recently finished, and hopefully this will give you some clues as to what's been going on down here in Sydney, and perhaps some ideas for what this might look like for you in your context, because not all universities are the same, of course. So it's not necessarily the case that everything we've done here will translate flawlessly to the Dutch context. It's all happening down here. Last week I had COVID. We've just finished the Ascalite conference at the Sydney University up the road. And tomorrow we start the Australian Learning Analytics Summer Institute. So it's all happening before Christmas. Luckily, I'm well enough to actually be with you in person now, which is a great pleasure. Okay, so today we're going to talk about LA culture, how we create learning analytics culture in an institution. And this comes ultimately from trust. And I'm going to propose that the way that you create trust in the university is from respectful conversations in 4 different rooms. We've got the boardroom, where you are dealing with senior leadership who obviously think about things in certain ways: university strategy, budgeting and resources, outcomes at a high level. You need to be talking in the staff room with the academics, with the instructors, the people who are actually going to need to trust you enough to deploy some possibly innovative learning analytics with their students. We're going to talk about the server room. We're talking about analytics. That means data, infrastructure, cloud hosting, authentication, all sorts of infrastructure stuff, which often doesn't get thought about very much when all you're doing is building prototype learning analytics tools that are never really going to get deployed at scale. And finally, we need to talk about the classroom, of course, which is the space where the students are engaging with the teachers and the students and teachers are engaging with the learning analytics. So these 4 rooms are metaphors. They're both literal and they're metaphorical and symbolic for the different spaces we have to have conversations in. So we're going to go on a tour around these rooms and think about the kinds of conversations that need to happen. First of all, I'm just going to say a brief word about learning analytics, because of course that can mean a lot of different things. Learning analytics does not just mean whatever you get out of the box from Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle or whatever. It means many different things. And in fact, I'm not going to talk that much about what you get out of your LMS today. I'm going to propose that we need to move beyond data dashboards. A learning analytics dashboard, you could say, well, it keeps the human in the loop. It's not AI. It's keeping the human in the loop. But learning analytics dashboards do not equal human agency, whether that's the teacher or the student, if they do not have the literacy to know what it is they're looking at, how to interpret it, and what sensible action would be. Simply graphing the data, which is typically what people think about, that doesn't equal good sense making. And we've been thinking a lot about data storytelling and how you use data storytelling principles to design interfaces. And if presenting the data to the educators means they're going to spend an awful lot of time having to work their way through that, they're not going to perceive that as a benefit either. So we've been talking a lot about automated feedback. And that really takes me to my next point, which is that learning analytics, it may be an exciting concept for us as researchers, but it's essentially a meaningless term to most academics, right? I mean, what is that? We have moved from talking about learning analytics much more to educational language around differentiation for different student abilities, belonging, and feedback. So the general heading is around automated personalized feedback. And I will give you just a few examples of that now to give you a sense of what that means. So we want to go beyond simply gathering data about students. We want to take that data, analyze it, and close the feedback loop. And we're also particularly focused on the kinds of capabilities and competencies that we might think of as lifelong learning capabilities. So we're not really very focused on just trying to teach physics better or social work or architecture in a sort of domain-specific intelligent tutoring system or coach. We're not really doing that kind of work. We're really trying to focus on strategic capabilities that impact many, many faculties and disciplines. So very quickly, a few examples, just so that you know what I'm talking about. This is work on dispositional learning analytics, which I've been working with Ruth Deacon-Crick for many years now. This is relatively low-tech analytics. There's a validated survey, which has been the subject of extensive research and development into how students approach their learning. You can see a few questions here. I like to find my own way of doing things. I've got at least one person close to me I can turn to for guidance in my learning. I like to try out new learning in different ways, you know, and they indicate whether this is not at all like me or very much like me. And after completing the survey, they get an immediate personalized profile back, along with personalized reports, which explain to them what these different constructs mean. You can see constructs here, which resonate a lot with 21st century capabilities and so forth, that are attracting a lot of interest. And then that is integrated into the subject that they are studying, because they then embark on some kind of inquiry project, and they work on stretching their profile on certain dimensions as part of their learning. So that's one example of what we mean by dispositional learning analytics, but we're not mining student activity online other than the way they respond to these questions in this psychometrically validated survey. And the academic team get to see de-identified cohort analytics that look like this, to give them a sense of how the cohort sees themselves and where the danger areas may be. For example, are a lot of students seeing themselves as, you know, not very open to learning opportunities, or a lot of students feeling that they don't have a strong sense of belonging? Not in this graph, but you might see that. Okay, so that's dispositional analytics and personalized feedback. We're doing quite a lot of work now with a platform called OnTask, which some of you will have heard of. We were just presenting our latest work at the Escalite conference here in Sydney. All these slides will be available afterwards, by the way, so you can follow these links up. And the idea here is that we have a data structure, which is taking in data about student activity, their attendance, their responses to surveys. In fact, it's an open system. Any platform data can be brought into this system. And you use that data to differentiate the kinds of messaging you'll give back to students based on very simple if-then rules. And so you have an editor where you can have conditions specified that if the students have met or failed a certain criterion, then this is what I want to say back to them. Then you get to preview the emails that will go back to the students before you send it out from the platform. So for example, the student gets an email from their academic coordinator. For students who attended at least one class, the academic is being very encouraging and supportive here. Thank you for attending at least one of your virtual classes over the last couple of weeks. This has been used heavily during COVID, I should say. But students who've missed all 3 classes over the last 3 weeks are going to get a rather different message. And part of the art here is, of course, in designing motivating yet still challenging messaging for students of different ability. And we've been doing a lot of work on how you do this kind of feedback design. Okay, so this is essentially mail merge technology for sending students, perhaps 1,500 students in a cohort, a large first-year class, get a personalized email back. Writing analytics, Marcus mentioned my work in writing analytics as well. This is a snapshot from our AccaWriter tool giving feedback on a research abstract, which is highlighting sentences that the natural language processing recognizes as hallmark moves in an archetypal abstract. We've also been doing a lot of work on reflective writing. We believe that this is still the first tool that provides personalized feedback on reflective writing, which is very different from analytical essay writing or research writing. You're talking about your thoughts and feelings about a significant experience, for example, working on a teamwork project or doing a work placement, talking about ideas that were surprising or unfamiliar, talking about what was challenging for you and how you're changing as a learner, engaging in self-critique and so forth. So very tailored NLP to try and pick out sentences. And again, this has been quite extensively studied and evaluated. And finally, some of our more recent work has been around building skills profiles with students. They can upload their CV, natural language processing extracts the skills that they seem to have in their CV. They can then review and edit that skills profile. They then use a platform called Track to, in this case, they're exploring data analytics and AI capabilities that they're interested in. They are expressing interest in this capability called data engineering, which involves all of these different skills. And then they can explore different courses on the UTS website, micro-credentials that will help them upskill in the areas that they're interested in. And that is a public demonstration. These buttons at the top, I should have said, these buttons will take you to the actual websites. And you can try this out. Okay, so those are the kinds of tools I'm talking about. This is the track summary that says, okay, if you studied these 2 courses, then you're going to gain these skills in purple. You already have the green ones, and you're going to gain these purple ones. Okay. All right, that's my little intro to what we mean by automated personalized feedback. So this is not about simply graphing dashboards for educators to make sense of. We're really focusing here on trying to action the data and do something with it, but we're not making summative judgments. We're not grading the essay. We're not classifying the student by their skills or their dispositions. We are provoking deeper reflection on the part of the student, on the part of the learner. These tools can also be used with staff, not just with students. Okay, let's go to our rooms. The first room is the boardroom. And so the story here at UTS about the strategic conversations that have been taking place around learning analytics. And this really goes back to 2011, before I even arrived here, 3 years before I arrived at UTS. I was still at the Open University when UTS started having conversations at a strategic senior level about what it would mean to become a data-intensive university. And you can see as we move through the years, there's the formation of what they called the Connected Intelligence Working Party, consultations across the university about where was the data flowing, where were the data blockages and so forth, the development of a CI strategy, starting to put in place plans for a Master of Data Science degree program. I arrived in 2014 and we launched KIC. We put out a call for faculties to bid to work with us once we had explained to them the kinds of technologies that were becoming available. So then we had faculties bidding to do a collaborative project with us. And we would then work with the most promising candidates. And you can see what's been really happening since then and into 2016 and onwards, growing the number of pilots, starting to do data science consulting within the university, and in some cases moving from pilots to mainstreaming some of these tools. And I'll talk more about that. In terms of the boardroom, you have to think about your organizational positioning. So KIC is an interesting kind of center because we are full of PhD students, postdocs, we have and some senior academics, but we're not in a faculty. The faculty structure is here under the DVC research, and this is where we will find academics working in research centers. And we work closely with those academics, of course. I'm in the division for the DVC for education. I'm not sure what you would call that person, the provost for education, perhaps, something like that. Along with the other directors who are running student support, professional development for teachers, all the learning technology support. We, of course, do work with the analytics team who are doing business intelligence as well, and the analytics people who are doing analytics off the LMS. So this is where we are positioned, not in a faculty, but we work with all faculties. So it's an interesting hybrid research and service unit. We cannot just float off and do exciting blue skies research. We have core funding in order to transform the teaching and learning experience at UTS. That is our primary audience. But of course, we publish internationally, we release open source code, and we collaborate with other people like other academics do. But we are very much about trying to impact the frontline student experience. Another piece that we've written, I wrote with Tim McKay at Michigan University. We talked about the organizational structure of our units. This was in 2018, and we compared KIC with what was called the Digital Innovation Greenhouse at Michigan at that point, which is part of their academic innovation division now. Also reporting to the provost for education. So that's an interesting article if you're interested in organizational architecture for this kind of center and why we ended up doing it the way we're doing it. Obviously, senior leadership, the vice chancellor, the deputy vice chancellors, other directors spend a lot of time talking about university strategy. At UTS, that's called UTS 2027. You can read all about that here if you're interested. And we have these kinds of priorities. And so obviously I have to make it very clear why is learning analytics relevant to thinking about a lifetime of learning? Why is learning analytics going to be part of our distinctive identity as a university? Why is the work we do in KIC part of the vision for connected research that has impact, and so forth? So you have to be able to talk that language, make it clear why what you're doing is strategically relevant. And then, because I'm in the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Education program, we have to align with the learning and teaching strategy specifically. At the moment, we talk about that in terms of orientation. The big jigsaw piece is around student orientation. A big jigsaw piece is around active learning. A big jigsaw piece is around feedback. Automated feedback is an important part of our learning and teaching strategy, along with, of course, human feedback from academics and feedback from industry, because we're very industry and employment focused as well. And then we have a big jigsaw piece around reflection, setting goals, and revising your plans as a learner. So again, without having to understand all the details, you can see automated feedback has established itself as part of the learning and teaching strategy. In 2017, my center went through a review where we were making the case that we should move from being a strategic pilot to business as usual, a part of the university that just continues. And so we had to make a sort of business case about the kind of impact we were having, and we created a few infographics of this sort. which showed the kind of engagement we were having internally and externally, that the fact that all faculties were now piloting at least one of the tools we had developed, how many staff had been through our training programs, that kind of thing. And here are a few quotes on these yellow sticky notes about the kind of language which you might expect to see in a business case, which shows the kind of impact we had. So, for example, giving an internship to every undergraduate was part of the Vice Chancellor's vision, and our data analytics work was looking at the impact of that and showing the impact of those internships on subsequent employment. We had internal groups for whom we were doing internal data consulting. And you can see here that we were closing the gap over the years for students who were engaging with one of the student language support teams. So they now had evidence that showed the impact they were having on students who were struggling. We had another faculty who sent students abroad for a year, and then they come back and finish their degree. And they wanted to know whether spending a year abroad actually had an impact compared to students who just stayed for 3 solid years in Sydney. And so again, our data scientist designed a statistical test to look at the impact of going abroad, and they were able to show, make an evidence-based claim that going abroad had tangible impacts on your outcomes as a student. So being able to make evidence-based claims and then take that out to future students as well as to current students was very helpful for them. That's an example of internal data consulting. If we think more about the learning analytics stuff, here's the writing feedback tool. We were able to explain to the university that UTS is the world's first university to provide instant feedback on reflective writing. Over 1,800 students have been through the program, and we've been evaluating that systematically, quantitatively, and qualitatively. Here's the dispositional analytics work. Again, we could say make evidence-based claims. We have profiles for almost 3,000 students. We can do cluster analysis on those profiles, and we have qualitative evidence as well about the value that this provided to students. Okay, so those examples of boardroom talk. Those will be familiar to the senior members in the audience, how you actually make your case in the boardroom and secure resources. Let's talk about the staff room. This is what in the UK might be called the common room. This is being able to talk with academics and get their trust. And no trust, no LA deployments. That's basically how it works, right? You cannot force academics to try innovative new ed tech unless you are literally going to parachute this onto them without any choice, which is not our way of working. So because we are academics ourselves, we are not a bunch of data scientists. We are not running the LMS and trying to persuade people to use the built-in dashboards. We are academics and researchers. We are educators ourselves. We know how to teach. We also know the pressures on academics. So that's a position of strength as far as we're concerned. We can talk to academics on knowing what they are dealing with. We know what the reputational risk is. Any academic who tries any new ed tech and has it blow up in their face in front of 100 students or 500 students, you know what that feels like, right? It's not a good feeling. So we have to make sure we're providing the right kinds of support for them, both in terms of learning analytics and learning design as well. Making sure that there's robust learning design. I'll talk a bit more about that later on, hopefully, if there's time. And there's mutual learning. They are learning about what the technology can do. We are also learning and respectful of them. They are the domain subject matter experts. When you get it right, it's very exciting. You get to deploy novel analytics with thousands of students. And if you do your evaluation well and you execute well, then it's very exciting. But you have to be able to walk in the shoes of the academics. This also extends to the work we do on human-centered design methods, participatory design methods. Here we have an academic sitting with a postdoctoral fellow, and the academic is literally writing the feedback that she wants students to receive on their reflective writing. And these links here describe that process in more detail. And if we just zoom in on this Google Doc, this is actually a Google Doc that the academic can type into. And we're saying, what would you say to a student if they have in the left-hand column, or if they have not done something in their writing? So for example, if there is a triangle without a square, that is, they've talked about how they're changing, but they don't seem to have talked about a particular incident or experience. That's what the blue square is. What would you say to them? And the academic is saying, okay, this is what I want to say. While it appears that you've reported on how you would change or prepare for the future, you don't seem to have done this. Okay. What would you say if you've got double circles? You know, two circle sentences where they talked about something that was challenging for them. Well done. It appears that you may have expanded the detail on the challenge you faced. So the academic's voice is coming through in the automated feedback tool. And we can just do this in a Google Doc, which is a very familiar environment for the academic, of course. On this right-hand screen, we've actually got two academics here who are working with the data scientist to establish the classification thresholds for sentence types. So at what point do we think a sentence should be flagged as engaging in self-critique? Okay, and we've got a Jupyter notebook here. It's not a very friendly user interface, but that's okay. This is the friendly user interface here. This is the development environment, but it's okay. The academics of it, we've explained to the academics what we're doing, and the research can literally adjust the thresholds of the classification engine so that we get the right sentences being highlighted until the academics are satisfied that this is a robust performance. Okay, again, you've got academics with the chance to actually shape the code of the ed tech they're going to use in their classes. That's not something academics get the chance to do very often. It's very empowering. So if you have that in-house capability, as opposed to simply buying in a product, this is the kind of co-design and trust-building conversations you can have. Again, this will be familiar to those of you who do participatory design, co-design work using very low-tech, high-touch media to get, in this case, academics talking about the problems they encounter in trying to give feedback to a lot of students. In this case, students talking about what it's like as nurses to come onto a simulation ward and where they feel they could get better feedback when they do these simulations. And that then gets translated into feedback dashboards later on that you'll see. So again, giving voice to non-technical people by giving media to them that they can deal with no training, or having conversations with them where they're very much part of the conversation and not just being consulted in a tokenistic kind of way. This was a particular example using playing cards where you engage in a conversation. You've got an academic, you've got a developer, you've got a researcher, you've got students, and they can play a card as part of the conversation. We called that the learning analytics deck. Okay, so that's the kind of conversation that we have in the quotes staff room, where we are building the confidence of the academics, educating them about what we mean by learning analytics, and they're actually getting to shape the analytics themselves. Let's talk about the server room. This is where we move from project to product, so to speak. That's the one-liner. These are steps that many LA prototypes often don't get this far down the road because they're developed as research prototypes to prove a concept. As researchers, you often aren't incentivized to take something all the way to product level because you've got to write the paper, get it published, demonstrate some cool new functionality, get the next grant, and move on, right? But at KIC, we can't just do that. Otherwise, we'd just be in a faculty research group. Our job is to deploy at scale when we have evidence the pilot is actually valuable. So we have to start talking to our IT people, okay? We have to start talking about secure user authentication. We want this to be a seamless experience for the staff and students. We need to talk about auditing the software architecture to make sure it's compliant with design principles. We need to talk about the security of our code, our APIs. We need to talk about cloud hosting and approved infrastructure and location. The data has got to stay within New South Wales, ideally, or at least Australia. We can't be hosting out there in the States without making a special case, for example. We need cloud scaling strategy if we're expecting massive spikes to occur when a lot of students will log on. And this is going to become part of the UTS learning technology ecosystem. So students and staff expect to be able to report a problem to IT, and the IT service desk needs to know, what the hell are you talking about when you talk about OnTask or Akawriter or whatever it might be, right? So they need to be able to go to the IT support desk and find help if a problem occurs. So these are the steps that you actually have to go through with your IT division to actually deploy in a responsible manner. And that's been a learning curve for us for sure as well. Okay, and then finally, last but obviously by no means least, we get to the classroom. This is where, first of all, I'll talk about what we do in the live face-to-face session, or of course it could be online and asynchronous or synchronous as well. But we're talking about the encounter of the students with the technology. We do a lot of academic professional development prior to deployment. So we have public webinars and things you can go and visit if you want to see how we do this, explaining to academics how they can deploy the technology in their courses. We've had many sessions online. Many of these are replayable if you're interested, where we introduce them and explain, how can you enrich your feedback ecosystem with automated feedback? How can you build student belonging with automated feedback? How can you respond to variable student pace of learning with automated feedback? How do you diagnose your students' needs with automated feedback? You see, so the language is very consistent. It's all about automated feedback. It's not about learning analytics. That's research talk. We explain to academics that they can't just drop a writing analytics tool in and just expect amazing things to happen without orientation and alignment with their teaching. So here we have a law academic. She teaches students how to write as well. And you can see, and there's a video clip here, rhetorical moves, those are the sentences that our Akawriter platform recognizes when you're making your thinking visible. Rhetorical moves indicate to the reader the writer's attitude to the text. Why do we worry about that? Because as lawyers, our job is to argue that the way we see the facts and the law favors a certain position or outcome. Okay, you're a lawyer. You're going to have to do this in court. You jolly well have to learn to do it in your writing too. That's what rhetorical moves do. That's why you need to pay attention and use this tool. And this academic aligned her assessment rubric for the law essays with the features that Akawriter would show the students. Okay, that's what we would regard as gold standard alignment with the student activity, with the learning design, and with the assessment rubric. Or we have an accounting academic, here's Nicole Sutton, explaining to her accountancy students, you may have signed up for accounting because you love numbers and Excel, but guess what? You're going to spend half your time writing as an accountant. So wake up, you got to learn how to write really well. Okay, so again, you contextualize the importance of this to the students, and you give them lots of examples from their course of what good writing looks like in Akawriter. So the students are very clear that this is not just some optional, give it a go if you've got time kind of tool. It's really important to do this as part of the assignment. Let's think about in-class support. So you've got, say, 300 students in class. This is one of our collaborative spaces. You can be in lecture mode, but of course you break the students into groups and they do collaborative work. And at some point, they may all be told to log into this learning analytics tool. So we have to create orientation for the students and the staff. We have to have either live, we might go in and give them a little introduction to what is this tool that we're going to be using, or we might record a video briefing, or we get the academic to record the briefing. We might create a Canvas module. Canvas is our LMS, and that is something that the academics can drop into their Canvas course so that the students all get sent off to do this, perhaps in a flipped mode, and orient themselves prior to engaging with the tool. We might need to have cloud services amped up for this session. because, when 400 students all hit the tool at once, that's going to be problematic unless we just sort of increase the cloud resources available. And we may well have worked with the academics to explain to them different learning design patterns for the effective use of the tool. I haven't got time to go into that in detail now, but we've talked about that extensively, and there are many links in the book chapter that I'm summarizing in this talk, which will show you some of those. And they're also on the websites. Okay, so that's what we do in the classroom. And then, of course, well, what happened? This is what we want to know. We want to know, did it make a difference? So that, of course, is part of what we do as researchers, to create the evidence base, which we can then show back to the university as to what's working, what's not working, as well as, of course, write good research papers and disseminate that to the wider community. So if you remember the OnTask tool, which gives this differentiated feedback, a lot of work that's been done by Lisa Lim, who is postdoctoral fellow here in automated feedback. We know that it can promote more optimal study habits, that it has enhanced academic performance, that it can elicit a kind of anxiety in students, but it's a safe anxiety. Getting a message that is a bit of a wake-up call for them. But if the message is well written, it's reassuring and motivating. It's not just telling them off. It can spur student motivation. It can foster strong feelings of support and belonging. We're talking a lot about belonging at the moment at UTS. And aspects of self-regulated learning, and it overall enhance the student's experience. So this is the kind of evidence-based claim that we want to be able to make to the university that says, we need to keep investing in this. We need to be able to scale this up. Okay, you can see the papers there. Or if we think about the nursing teamwork, we can now generate this timeline for the nursing students that show that, after the patient lost consciousness, the team reacted slowly. That's a bit of data storytelling. Give me the headline at the top, and then we highlight on the timeline that something was orange, and we're explaining to them that they should have done something earlier than they did. Okay, and of course we do quantitative and qualitative evaluations of these kinds of feedback visualizations. There's a quote from one of the interviews we had with a student focus group that it helped them look back and see my exact actions, not just perceptions of it. Or we're talking to the educators about it as well. I think this would be really helpful for students if you gave them some structured reflection questions. So that was interesting. The academics were saying, we think we may have to scaffold engagement with this visualization, give them some structured reflection questions and ask them to reflect on what they were doing, how they engaged with the patient and their team members. Okay, so these are the kinds of insights we get when we actually do the evaluation with the stakeholders, and that's where my sort of HCI background comes in, because it makes no sense to develop stuff unless you actually try and evaluate it in authentic contexts. Or if we think about Acarita, again, here's a quote from the students. I think what is being taught is something I was already aware of, but by being forced to actually identify ways of arguing, along with the types of words used to do so, it's broadened my perspective. Or the academics saying, look, we can't afford to give formative feedback when we have 400 students, right? This is what this tool is doing. It's giving you 24/7 instant formative feedback on draft after draft after draft. That is clearly humanly impossible, but so you can see the academic just says that won't scale. This tool fills a gap for us. So this is a niche. We're not doing anybody out of a job here. We're not automating the human out of the loop. They've still got to grade the piece, but we're filling a gap that would otherwise be humanly impossible to fill. And the academics, in fact, saying we've seen a marked improvement in students' written communication. Students are meeting or exceeding the expectations we have. So these are the kinds of, very strong messages which encourage other academics to then start adopting the tool. Perhaps their early adopter colleagues are the first ones, and then their more cautious colleagues follow once they've seen their academic colleagues using the tool. And that is one of the joys of seeing this stuff scale up when we've been going for 8 years now. This was actually just last Friday. We had our university conference, our learning and teaching conference, and we had academics from the faculties. Here's a law academic talking about his use of OnTask to give differentiated feedback. A great quote from his student there that they felt that the tutor was really taking care of them. Academics from the science faculty talking about the track skills analytics tool that they've been using to develop their new science capability framework. An accounting academic talking about differentiating feedback to students with OnTask. A learning designer talking about how she worked to develop Canvas modules to introduce students to track. So this for me, I get a huge kick out of this when we have our colleagues telling their colleagues about their use of our tools. That's way better than learning analytics researchers sort of trying to push their tools at academics. We feel that we're further down that road now, and it's very motivating. Okay, so those are the 4 rooms. Just to say a word about ethics, because that's obviously important here. Needless to say, if we're doing research, then we have to go through our research ethics process. But the broader question is that as this becomes part of our infrastructure, we need to maintain the trust of the community. Everybody is quite rightly exercised about, algorithmic justice, data privacy, and the whole thing. And of course, in Europe, you're way ahead of the game with GDPR. Okay, so we have been thinking about how do you have a meaningful, structured, rewarding consultation process with your community, your staff and student community about the deployment of these kinds of infrastructure. This time last year, we had just finished running a series of 5 workshops under COVID lockdown conditions, but we brought in some very expert deliberative democracy facilitators who were running 3 to 4 hour Zoom workshops. They were very dynamic, very hands-on, very energizing, but they did work the students and staff quite hard. But what we did was go through what's called a deliberative democracy process. Some of you may be familiar with this concept from politics. You recruit a mini public, a representative of the broader public. In this case, it was 20 students and staff demographically sampled to represent the diversity of the UTS population. And they commit to learning from what we call expert witnesses about what is learning analytics. And they commit to reflective, high quality deliberation, not ranting or shouting at each other. October through November, they engage in these interactive workshops where we presented with them with a whole bunch of dilemmas, ethical dilemmas, to help them think about how these tools are or could be deployed within the university. And their job is to come out with a set of principles that they feel should govern the UTS use of analytics and AI in teaching and learning. And then a couple of points they present midway and at the end to the UTS leadership, what they're working on, and get feedback from domain experts from across the university as well. And moving into this year, informing the development of our UTS AI policy. So here's just a couple of screenshots from the Zoom final session where you can see we had our chief data officer, our head of corporate information, especially around privacy and ethics, and our director for social justice, along with 2 members of staff and 2 students who were elected by their peers to present the work that they've been doing to the university's leadership, resulting in a report and a set of principles. You can see bias and fairness, equity and access, issues around human agency and authority, with examples of how they felt these would play out for students, educators, and the university as an institution. And you can access this report at this link here. And this year, that has helped to shape our operations policy, which is where the university has adopted a set of AI ethics principles and how we're going to implement them as a university. So it's been deeply rewarding to bring our community on this journey and to have them feeding into this policy. And now, of course, we have to make sure that it actually gets implemented and isn't just a nice set of AI ethics principles, which everybody is publishing and signing up to. The question is, how do you actually make it work? And that is what we'll be working on next year, of course. Okay, so just to wrap up then, the boardroom, the staff room, the server room, and the classroom, you build the culture through trust building, respectful conversations. And I'll just finish with this slide because I like these balancing stones, but it kind of gets the message over, right? I feel like we're balancing a whole bunch of interesting processes here. LA design and user experience, that's my HCI head. Learning analytics and learning design that are aligned so that we know what the data means. It's coming out of activities that we understand. Engaging stakeholders in the shaping of those tools and infrastructure and aligning that with organizational strategy. And if you can get that alignment and balance right, we build and hopefully sustain trust. And that trust, as they say, is hard to earn and easily burned. And our job now is to make sure that we take our community with us by deploying learning analytics and AI in responsible ways. Okay, that's the journey we've been on. I hope that that was interesting and that maybe resonates with some of the challenges you face in your universities. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Questions?
Thank you, Simon. I was wondering, could you say a little bit about your team at CIC? How big is it? What kind of people do you have in your team?
Yeah, I try and recruit good communicators because even as a PhD student, you have got to build and sustain a long-term collaboration with one or more academics. And obviously that continues as with our postdocs and more senior staff. So good communication skills are important. We have people who tend, as you wouldn't be surprised, they either tend to come from an education background or a technical background, and then they have to learn the other bit. Because we're doing a form of ed tech here, right? So we have got technical people who can build technology and do data science, but we've got people who come from more pedagogical grounding. If you look at the PhDs that come out of KIC, some of those are more technical, some of them are more pedagogical. The structure of the group is very much like a faculty research group, right? A couple of senior academics, myself and Kirsty Kitto, couple of postdocs, and then half a dozen PhD students. And then we have a full-time system developer, full stack developer. And then depending on the projects that we have, because we have internal funding for different strategic projects, that might allow us to hire a UX designer, user interface designer. It might allow us to hire another postdoc for a short period, or some research assistants or some data science students, depending on the project. I can see a question from Alan in the chat here.
Yes.
Is there an argument for an open repo, something like Hugging Face, for sharing educational models, i.e. pre-trained models for writing analytics, etc., even for research prototypes? Or is there a domain-specific one already? Something for Solar. Okay, so the question here is really about, so yeah, there can be trouble sharing data because students' work is often hard to share outside the institution, right, for ethical reasons. But yes, we have been thinking that sharing models could be a way of, for example, of doing collaborative writing analytics research. So that would be one approach. The Acarita tool, the OnTask tool, they are both open source. The Dispositional tool is a product, a social enterprise spun off out of Ruth Crick's research to service all the interest in it. The Track tool is closed source at the moment. So we've got a hybrid mix of open and closed.
I was just thinking about the ethical benchmarking, like what is it, AI 360 or something like that. If you move your pre-trained models, you can deploy them at other universities potentially, and you can also potentially benchmark them for group bias and other things like that. And then as a community, you can agree what the benchmarks are. So I was sort of thinking along when there's a lot more models coming up, basically not now, but when the field's a little bit more mature and we have a lot more trained models, then how are you going to have a conversation around ethics? And I thought this might help a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, Andrew Gibson, who used to be a postdoc with me, is now a lecturer at Queensland University of Technology, has been thinking a bit about that as well. So we can always pick that conversation up if you're interested. As I say, Acarita is available open source, and we're keen to build a community of researchers interested in sharing data or sharing models. You know, so for example, if you're trying to get engineering undergraduates to reflect critically on their work placements, we've got undergrad engineers. You know, there could be some very interesting cross-institutional, cross-cultural collaborations around that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
More questions?
Considering time, I would like to thank you here. We can follow up if we collect some questions during the coffees, and you probably collect them in the mail, aggregate them if there are specific questions. I need to look here. Thank you very much again, Simon, for being available and learning about your story at UTS and CPD. That's very interesting. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.